Hey, everybody. We are live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter talking about leadership and culture. We've got multiple doctors in the house today, so everyone should be just fine. Dr. Avery and Dr. Wilson, and then a few just normal dudes here as well. So, Trenton, I'm handing it over to you to take it away. Be careful on them. Have fun, guys.
Thank you, Mark. I am excited, actually, we have two doctors and Steve and me on this webinar. I'm excited to invite everybody. I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves. I'll just introduce myself again. I'm Trenton Goble. I'm the Vice President of K12 Strategy, Product Strategy at Instructure. I'm excited to have Claudia and Steve and Dean. Today we're going to be talking about culture and the challenges that folks are having as you've moved to a remote or learning from home environment. Let's start with Claudia. We'll go to Steve and we'll go to Dean. Quick introductions, Claudia.
Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Claudia Avery. I currently serve as Deputy Superintendent of Academics in Fairfield County School District, which is located in Winnsboro, South Carolina. We have about 2,500 students, and I'm entering my 24th year or completing my 24th year in education. I'm glad to be here with everyone today.
We're excited. Steve.
Steve Giles, 35 years in education, been a principal for 26 years. I am currently the principal of Hawthorne Academy, which is a K-9 school here in Salt Lake City. International Baccalaureate is our charter. Spanish is our language. And that's about it.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. And Dr. Wilson.
Hey, my name is Dean Wilson. Super excited to be here. I'm the Vice President of Student Services at Uinta Basin Technical College. We service about 4,200 adult and secondary students. Have had nearly every role you can have in education. I started out as a facilities maintenance worker and have been an aide at a school for children with autism, been an assistant principal, assistant superintendent, and currently a vice president of a technical college.
Awesome. So we have a diverse group here, diverse backgrounds coming from a wide variety of just very different kind of environments. And I think that's really important for today's discussion as we talk about how do we maintain school culture when we have had so much transition over a very, very short period of time. In our first group discussion, I think, Dean, you were part of that group discussion. We talked about the fundamental five in building a framework around how we can communicate to our teachers at home a structure that will allow them to create consistency in their instructional practice, which is what we talked about in our second meeting with a group of folks. And today we're talking about culture, but I want to remind folks about the fundamental five. Mark is going to put up a PDF, a handout of the fundamental five. Just to remind folks, I also want to highlight, if you're interested, we had a lot of people say, you have a handout that I could send my teachers on the fundamental five, where we talked about answering those key critical questions that stress students out. If we at home can make sure that our lessons are addressing these fundamental questions, what am I supposed to do? I imagine most of you, if you are school administrators, teachers, that's probably the number one thing you get in your inbox right now is we're a little confused about what we're supposed to do. We want to know when things are due, if they're due. We still want to be able to provide feedback for students. How did I do? And then most importantly, are we providing channels for our teachers and our students to continue to connect and provide support for one another beyond just say email or text? Sometimes that's the only thing that works. And then what more can I do? And what we mean by that is at home, you know, we're not all going to learn the same way. And you may be sending home assignments as teachers that students may be struggling with, may not have fully understood. Are we creating opportunities for students to show us that they're understanding, that they're learning? Maybe they go outside the normal parameters. And that website is there if you'd like to download that handout. Mark is going to put that in the chat, so you'll be able to grab that as well. So let's start talking about culture, because I can't think of too many things in my career that I think have been so disruptive or potentially disruptive to school culture. Steve, as you've kind of managed at your school this transition, I'm sure the first thing you probably worried about was, how are my kids? Are they safe? Are kids getting fed? Are their needs being met? All of those kind of basic things. But time has kind of pushed us out a little bit. And I'm sure you're making more of a transition to how do we make sure that students are continuing to learn? But I want to know today, what are you doing to address your school culture? How do you make sure teachers are okay, that teachers are feeling safe, that people are feeling connected? What's that like for you, Steve?
Good question. I think, like you said initially, your greatest concern is for the kids and for their families and how are things going. And then it quickly moves to your staff. How are your teachers doing? And how are they dealing with all of the new challenges that they have ahead of them? How are they dealing with all the technical things that they really haven't had to deal with before? And I'll tell you, those 5 things that we just talked about that you put up on that PDF are incredibly helpful, because it brought structure to what was chaos to me initially, just trying to go out in so many different areas at once. And that allowed us to kind of focus in and have more of a structured approach to what we were doing, starting with teachers. And one of the things that I think has helped us out at this point is just reaching out in a personal way to teachers, not through email, not through text, but calling each of them and finding out, hey, how are they doing? And then asking the questions of, how can we help you facilitate learning for students?
Yeah, I think sometimes we think real high tech, and a lot of times it's not super high tech. The phone's been around for a while. So that ability to reach out to our teachers and have that personal connection is super important. I think, Claudia, what have you guys done in your school district? And thinking about it too, not just in supporting your teachers, but in supporting principals that are out there from your position as an assistant superintendent.
Well, from our vantage point as leaders, one of my jobs is making sure that we don't forget about our instructional leaders. As you said earlier, these are very uncertain times, and the times that we're in now has been very disruptive. So we've been very intentional in ensuring that we are in constant contact with our leaders. We host each week a leadership meeting with our entire leadership team, which is composed of all our departmental heads, our principals, so that if they're coming across some obstacles or challenges as a collective team, we can sit down together through a Google Hangout, through a Zoom, and we're able to to address those challenges that they all are experiencing. And then they in turn can feed off one another, they can brainstorm together on how we can address the challenges that either we're facing as a district or they're facing individually with their respective families.
Yeah, I think that's really important. There's a top-down element of this. I think it's important that people understand that people are looking up for guidance, but they're also looking up for support. And they feel that. Is it just purely do the X's and O's, or are we thinking about the whole person? Dean, what about you from a technical college? You guys are dealing with a wide variety of technical issues in terms of how do we continue to support folks while learning at home, but also a pretty diverse staff and group of people that you're trying to connect with and work with.
Yeah, we span 2 campuses, 3 if you include our jail facility, and we have 14-year-olds all the way up to 70-something-year-olds. And so in terms of access and equity in terms of technology or to their educational experience, really at the end of the day, it has to be individualized. It has to be personalized. From a leadership standpoint, I got a question for you, Trenton. How you feeling today? How are you doing today?
I feel great.
What's one thing we're going to win on today? What are we going to win with today?
I'm gonna go to bed happy.
You're going to go to bed happy. So yeah. If I call you in the morning or I text you in the morning and I say thumbs up or thumbs down, you're going to give me something back.
I'm going to guarantee you, I'm going to work hard today. I've got, at the end of my day, I've scheduled a walk.
Okay, don't talk about it. Let's be about it. You're going to get a text. I'm going to write down a reminder because I'm going to follow through on my commitment there. So I'm going to write down text Trenton. And I will text you tomorrow. And I do want to know how that went. But there's a purpose for that, T. when we talk about systems, when we talk about culture, really culture times systems equals success. And we're in a unique situation where systems are really stagnant. And so the only thing that can live or die is your culture. And as I look at our college and I look at what we're embarking on right now, we're refining all of those processes that don't get time, that don't get attention. And we're really ensuring that as we look at this situation, we've gone through the immediacy phase of this pandemic. You know, what are we going to do with students? How are we going to get them funding? How are we going to stop schedules? We've dealt with the immediate impact. We've got things online. We've got things ready to go. What we need to start looking at is how are we going to stabilize? And then how are we going to reentry? What does stabilization for student schedules look like? What do enrollments look like? What do projections look like? You know, I took notes from my last pandemic. Shoot, wait, I didn't have many. So we don't really know how to move forward. But when we lead through confidence. When we lead with compassion. People, purpose, and process. At the end of the day, agnostic to any system that we work in, if we have the right people with the right purpose, engaged in the right processes, we're going to be fine. We're going to get through this. But I think having a genuinely optimistic view of how we're going to get through this ultimately sets the tone for everybody that works. I don't want to say underneath you, but works with you. You're right. They look to the top for that mission statement, that bravado, whatever you want to call it. You got to be on point as leaders right now. We got to lead with courage and humility at the same time.
Yeah, I think it's really important. You know, I think there isn't a playbook for this. We have people who are scrambling. And one of the things is I've reached out to leaders all over the country. I talked to Claudia, talked to some of Claudia's peers, talked to a superintendent in a neighboring district to Claudia the other day, just because I want to know what was going on in South Carolina. And I see a lot of people that are going above and beyond. And I see a lot of focus on the things that we care a lot about, the interpersonal, the emotional welfare of our students, of our teachers. But I also, when I get online and I look at what's going on with teachers right now, I see a lot of teachers who have children of their own at home, who are like overwhelmed with trying to school their own children, manage their own children, prep and plan for lessons, make a transition to a remote learning environment, probably learning some new technical tools, putting in a tremendous amount of time. I think as I talked to each one of you at some point, I'd ask about, has your workload gone up or down? And without exception, every administrator has said, I haven't worked so hard in my career. So Claudia, as you're kind of thinking about, those elements of, yes, we're addressing the social and emotional, we're making some of these transitions. What are you seeing in your teachers right now in terms of being overwhelmed, being pushed too far? And what are we going to do to make sure that we reel it in and make sure that people know that there's a point where you're not, good is going to be good enough?
Well, I will say to you that with South Carolina, I think on March the 16th, that's when our governor decided to close schools. And we met as a leadership team the week before, and I had given the charge on that Friday to start preparing for the possibility of the closure. And in Sunday, that following Sunday, we got the notice that in fact schools were going to be closing on that Sunday. And so what I can tell you from March 16th until last Thursday, the work that our teachers are doing, and I could say this for all of the teachers in the United States and beyond, the work that they are doing has been tremendously inspiring. We've had teachers take their eating kitchen dining room area and turn it into their kindergarten and preschool classroom, even though they recognize that all of their students may not be able to hop on a Zoom or a Google Hangout at the exact same time, but they're still giving them the opportunity to tune in and to learn. We have stressed in our district is that it's important that you do something And the do something could be you're reaching out to the kids, because in our population, our teachers are the most consistent face that our students see on a day-to-day basis. And as you all know, with building that level of culture, the relationship building, going back to what Dean said earlier about people, the relationships that are being developed and cultivated during this time have been key to sustaining our kids, because our kids are seeing our teachers have office hours that have been established throughout the day. They know they can expect that their teachers are going to be online at 9. But even if a kid cannot access the internet, the teachers have given them the opportunity to pick up a telephone to call them. They have made it very intentional in a way that is non-threatening. And I think it's important right now that we recognize the hard work that our teachers are doing, because without state testing, without the parameters that we all have grown accustomed and the accountability, the teachers are still rocking. I mean, they are teaching every single day and putting their best foot forward.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Steve, I want to ask you I wanted to expand a little bit on what Claudia was talking about there. You didn't have as much time for your teachers to prep. I think your teachers had almost no time to prep. Mm-hmm. But when we talk about school culture, it seems like a lot of times it gets caught up in mission statements, our mission, our vision, our value, our goals, and usually it says something like, we believe that all children can learn and deserve to have a highly, it kind of goes on. And where we end up is a mission and a culture that's focused on trying to create equitable learning opportunities for students. Right now, it's not super equitable in terms of student access to the technology or access to material. I think if that's an important part of your school culture, right, we want every student to have that opportunity and we want highly engaged and supported teachers. How are you managing that right now, given today's circumstances?
Well, I think when you talk about highly engaged quality instruction, you talk about accountability, you talk about equal access, you talk about a number of those things. I think what Dr. Wilson was saying a little bit earlier, where a lot of it does come from leadership, and I think that a lot of it, like Dr. Avery was saying, comes from relationships. What we have to realize is we can't go into every single home, and we have to realize that when students come into our buildings, there's a certain level of normalcy that we can create because we're in control of that environment. But now that kids are in their own homes, our school has become a classroom of 200, 300 classrooms now or more, because every single home is its own classroom. And whether it's access to technology, whether it's access and availability of parental or sibling help or whatever, we really don't know. We've got surveys that are going out now to our community and trying to get feedback to see, what's going on, what can we do to help you? And then I see teachers starting to freak out with a number of I don't know if they're criticisms, but they're critiques, and they're trying to give you ideas on things that you can do better. And then I see teachers overreact to that. And part of my work with them on walking them back off from the ledge is, look, you've got 95% of your parents in this school who are either satisfied or highly satisfied, and you have 5% who have concerns. And you can't let that 5% of concerns dictate what is going on or over color what's actually happening in your own mind. You're doing a really good job, and you've got to keep things in perspective here. The quickest path to failure is trying to please all of the people all of the time. We're open, we're listening, we want to be teachable, we want to take what people have and change the obvious things that need to be changed, but stay the course, reach out. And like I said, a phone call from us to our staff is huge. And it's so huge that our staff now is reaching out and not just emailing or working on Canvas or doing different things with their students. They're actually making physical phone calls to all of their students. Had a science teacher this morning, my physics teacher and biology teacher says, I have 100 students that I'm going to call this week. That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
You know what? I can guarantee you that every one of those families that gets a call from him is going to be thrilled, and they're going to feel like we care. There's a connection, and that's what really matters. So at this point, while we are still concerned about rigor, we are still concerned about trying to make sure that it's relevant and that there's a doable amount of work. The biggest thing that I'm concerned about at our school is just making sure that people feel connected. And if they do feel connected, I think that we're going to get some good work out of them. And it's going to be hopefully something that's project based, or it's something that's relevant to their situation and what's going on. But it just boils back down to the essence of just relationships. We care about you, and we want you to know that you're okay, and learning will continue.
Yeah, I think all of those things are kind of at the essence or the foundation of what we're trying to do. I think that culture of we care. We continue to show that we care. There's all kinds of obstacles and roadblocks that people are being confronted with as they're managing that. And I can almost hear some teachers saying, man, calling 100 people, like, yeah, I'm just tapped today. Like the idea isn't necessarily that everybody should get on the phone and start calling every student every single day. I think it's teachers having some degree of autonomy to gauge where they're at and where student needs are. And I think, Dean, as you're thinking about this in kind of that higher ed setting, it may be a little bit different. But I also think there's probably a whole bunch of instructors that are wondering if they're measuring up. I think everybody, as they struggle and they scramble, is probably thinking somebody else is doing it better. Whether they're using an LMS platform like Canvas to be able to continue to deliver resources to students and provide feedback to students and get information, connect and communicate with students. I have a feeling that part of whether or not we are feeling good about our school culture is, like Steve said, whether or not we're feeling connected. And part of that connectedness is also having a vehicle by which we can kind of gauge our own performance. Am I meeting expectations? How are you dealing with that, Dean, in your setting?
Feedback. As I look at, my daily to-do list, I've got a checklist. There's things that I've got to do. I've got to check in with the front office. I've got to check in with financial aid. I've got to check in with the registrars. I got to check in with instruction. There's a lot of people that I need to check in with. That's my checklist. But when I'm checking in, I'm sitting down one-to-one and just making that one moment with that one employee that, I might be their direct supervisor. That might be the 15 seconds they get with me that week. That's got to be the most impactful 15 seconds I spend with that person. They've got to know that I care about them. They got to know that I hear them, and they got to know that I'm willing to go to bat for them. If there's something they need during this crisis, I've got to be that person that's going to be able to provide it for them or find the person that can do that for them. Every day, I've got a little thing above my window that I hung up, make deposits because people will make withdrawals. I say that a lot, but every day I try to make deposits with people because whether we like it or not, as an educational system, we've just took a gigantic pre-assessment on online learning. We have expectations, we have present levels of performance, and we have a gap. There's only 30 days of school left in most of America. We have 3 months that we can plan a better plan for next year. Should these situations, become long-term, or should we ever have to re-enter these situations? And so in terms of kind of the way that I try to manage people, or the way that I try to manage my interactions, is I do have a checklist, but I think of it as a check-in. I try to make deposits with people because there's going to be people that want to make negative withdrawals, like Steve had pointed out. And at the end of the day, we've got to act on this. I don't want to be the person that says, oh, well, we just need some time. Man, time is finite. We only have so much amount of it, and we don't know how much that we have. And so given the information that we've got over the last period of time, what can we do to make a better situation in the fall, in the winter, in the spring, in the future? What can we really learn from this? And I think that as we as educators start to take that mic, start to take that pen, that's where we author our own story. If we're unwilling to do that, we're at the perils of the public at this point. So I think we're at a very crucial point in education where we need to pick up the pen and start authoring our own story.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Whenever I ask questions, they tend to be really long-winded. I'm going to ask a quick one, a short one, Claudia. For me, it's going to be relative. But as you look at the schools that you're working with and teachers, and you look at culture, do you see culture changing? Do you see it improving, or do you see it as something like, oh boy, as we come back together, we're really going to have to address this? And I'm sure maybe it's different from one school to the next, but what do you see?
You know, every one of our schools has a different culture. But to answer your question very simplistically, I think it has changed for the better. I think that the culture, this pandemic has really shown people what we're capable of when we all pull together for that common goal. You mentioned earlier, yes, we all have mission statements, we all have values, but I will tell you that during this pandemic, everybody has pulled together. Everybody has a role, and those roles are integral, are very important to how we fulfill the ultimate mission, which is just ensuring that every student, every family is okay. And I think that's what we have to focus on. And I think someone said earlier about, I think Trenton, you said it earlier about just looking at the whole person as the teacher. We also have to look at the whole family and the student that is made up, that is a part of this family as well. We have to be able to address that. So I think families have been changed, cultures within the school have changed, and the interaction between the home and the school and the district has been changed for the better.
Yeah, I hope that's the case. I also, as we're looking at this, I think we have to be cognizant of how much energy that has taken from everybody. Both of you have probably invested more of your time and energy than you probably thought you were going to in the months of March and April and May. But Steve, you and I talked a while ago about, this has brought out the better angels. I think in our teachers, and I think parents probably look at teachers differently than they have in the past. Like, it's hard for me with 1 or 2 or 3 kids at home, but my word, what must that be like with 30 or 40 or 50 kids in a classroom? That maybe sounds a little harder than it did prior to all of this. But Steve, you and I talked a little bit about, as we have, from a culture perspective, really focused on those kind of lower levels of Maslow. You had mentioned to me that you were concerned a little bit that when we come back, that we might see some real quick shifts in what we do, in terms of what fears might induce in us as we come back, fears of where students are at. I don't know if you remember that conversation, but I'd love for you, if you do, to kind of do a better job than I did of talking through that.
Well, no, and I'm going to speak, and hopefully it's going to be aligned with where you wanted to go with the question. But the reality is, this is our first and hopefully only pandemic. But there have been other disasters that have occurred of other types at different times that we've all had to deal with. And initially, there is this spike of good. We feel a camaraderie, we feel a fellowship, we feel a sense of family, and we reach out and we're understanding and we're forgiving. And I see that with teachers, I see that with parents, I see that with a lot of things that are going on, which is encouraging. I like that part of it. But there's this, we become familiar with it, people start to relax, and we kind of migrate back to, our bad habits, if you will, or we migrate back to where we were. What we need to remember is things like this can be traumatizing. We all deal with it in different ways. Some students are going to come back and they're going to have all kinds of concerns. Teachers are going to come back and they're going to have varying concerns. Some of our students are going to come back and they are going to have had one or both parents or an older brother or sister that really kind of help them maintain some kind of a schedule, and their learning is going to take a real strong trajectory. Other kids, because of the trauma, are, it's not like they were in a fetal position underneath the table for the last 6 weeks, but in some regards, they're going to come back and there's going to be a big delay in the learning that they're going to have had. And leadership styles, some people are going to be very encouraging, very nurturing, very empathic, and bringing people in. There's going to be an opportunity, and Dr. Wilson was a part of that conversation as well. And he said, when there's a need, certain people are going to rise to fill a void of whatever is missing. And there are going to be people that are going to come back and have all of the answers on ways that we can close the gap and we can save the kids that were behind. And it's going to become, there's the possibility that it can become very dogmatic in our instruction, very high structure, very fast paced. And I think we just need to be careful to keep a balance and remember the most important thing, and that is that a school is a series of complex human events, and everybody reacts to them differently, and we want to make sure that we are remembering the child and the teacher and not always just so hyper focused on data that the humanity is lost in our efforts to close the gap and get everybody back on board. I don't know where you wanted to go.
Yeah, that's exactly where I wanted you to go, because I think as we wrap things up today, I think that notion is really important, that culture is not something that you create one day and it sticks and it's just there and you got it. Culture, as we've seen through the challenges that this pandemic has brought on, is something that is certainly not fixed. It is subject to change very quickly. It changes with leadership. When we move one leader in and an old one out, that changes culture very, very quickly. And so I'm glad that you said it the way that you did, Steve, because it's a concern that I have, right? That as we have gotten so tied into making sure that people feel safe, I also hear all of these conversations as we start to really ponder the impact this is having on learning and how in the world on the next steps are we going to get kids caught up. And what I hope we do is that we remember that we've got to make sure that kids get caught up, number one, in terms of feeling safe coming back to school, feeling engaged with their teachers and the environment. They'll have been out for a while. And that getting back into the groove is going to take some time, which means, yes, we need to address those academic needs, but let's also not lose sight of what we were dealing with. Now, Dean, I would love for you to comment on this. I do want to highlight that when you dropped off for a minute, both Claudia and Steve said, hallelujah, Dean left. So I hope they don't feel bad that you made it back on, but I'm going to give you this opportunity to kind of respond to what Steve was saying. By the way, it was just Steve. It wasn't Claudia.
Well, I would expect nothing less. Claudia is nothing but polite. So Steve and I, we go the rounds. So no, I think Steve hit the nail on the head. You're going to have all sorts of different people rise up and attempt their best efforts to steady the ship, to right the ship. And he's absolutely dead on when you talk about school being a series of complex events or a series of complex human interactions. You tend to remember the last way somebody treated you. If I've been in a fight with my wife, I tend to walk in the house a little scary. If I, treat one of my frontline employees short, I might get treated short the next time I work with them. I think in terms of culture is simply a weather pattern. You have good days, you have bad days, and really the way that we adjust to culture is you don't change the weather, you change how you prepare for that weather. And right now we need to dig in and we need to prepare for what's going to be some troubling times. But at the end of this, we'll get through the storm and we'll be better because of it. So I think keeping weather in and of itself as a living, breathing its own pattern, a weather pattern, if you will, is a really good way to view the current situation we're in.
Yeah, I think that's nice. And by the way, Dean, both Steve and Claudia, we're glad you're back. Nobody said anything bad about you while you were gone. But I'm going to give Claudia the last word. As I think one of the things we try to do with these discussions is to create empathy, right? To show that, I think there are a lot of people that are out on islands, especially when it comes to leadership. Everybody's wondering if they're doing it right or is somebody else doing it better. And I think the beauty of having people like yourselves come in and share what you're doing is it just allows others to see that they're not alone, right? And I would love for Claudia, as you think about the transition that you have made, that your teachers have made, that your students have made, and that parents have made, what are you most proud of as you reflect on your successes in Fairfield as you guys have gone through this?
I think one of the things I'm most proud of is how resilient we have been. We have had students. We are in a district that has over 90% of our students are free and reduced lunch. And we've been able to give them access to resources, Wi-Fi, because over 30% of our families don't have access to the internet. We've been able to feed our families since the closure. And I think one of the things I'm most proud about is the fact that we have pulled together to, in many ways, embrace this pandemic together to make sure that we are there for our families and we're there for our kids. And we're going to continue beyond the pandemic to show up for our families. So that is what I'm most proud about as we're on this journey toward getting back to a sense of normalcy.
And I hope as folks who tuned in, as they're thinking about their own situation and whether they're a district leader, a school leader, or a teacher, a parent, whatever your role is, I hope that you take time to reflect on those things that you're most proud of. And more importantly, if you're in a position of leadership, I hope you take the time and the opportunity to share that with your teachers, because I think that's really important. So I want to thank Claudia, Dr. Avery, Dr. Wilson, and Steve for joining us today. I want to thank Mark for the back-end support that he does, and remind folks that we are doing these leadership webinars every Tuesday for a while, because I think it's a great opportunity for us to kind of take the pulse and see where folks are at. And we hope that you'll join us again next week.
Thanks, Trenton.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.